A one-legged girl asked a stranger, "Can I sit here?" His answer changed her life forever. The little girl stood there, gripping her crutches as if they were the only things holding her together, her one leg trembling under the weight of both her body and her fear. Rain dripped from her hair, her clothes clung to her thin frame, and her voice, barely louder than a whisper, carried a question that would change two lives forever. She looked at the man sitting alone at the corner table, a tired single father with a world of worries behind his eyes, and asked, "Can I sit here?" What he said next didn't just break her silence. It shattered the walls she had built around her heart. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of small moments to change lives, take a second to like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this. The cafe was nearly empty that evening, the kind of quiet that feels heavier than noise. Outside, the storm had turned the streets into mirrors of blurred lights and rushing shadows. Inside, Daniel sat hunched over a cup of coffee he hadn't touched, his young son asleep beside him, his small head resting on Daniel's arm. Life hadn't been kind to Daniel lately. Losing his wife 2 years ago had left a hole that nothing seemed to fill. Since then, every day felt like a battle between exhaustion and responsibility. He worked long hours, barely making ends meet, and the weight of raising his son alone pressed down on him in ways no one could see. He had chosen that corner table not just for its privacy, but because it allowed him to disappear, to exist without being noticed, to not have to explain the sadness that lived quietly behind his tired eyes. But that evening, disappearing wasn't an option anymore. The soft tapping sound of crutches against the cafe floor broke through the silence. It was slow, uneven, almost hesitant, like each step required a small act of courage. Daniel looked up almost instinctively and saw her, a girl, no older than 12, standing near the entrance. Her clothes were worn, slightly oversized and damp from the rain. One pant leg was pinned neatly above her knee, revealing the absence of her other leg. Her face carried a mixture of fear and determination, as if she had rehearsed this moment in her mind 100 times but still wasn't ready for it. People noticed her, of course they did, but just as quickly they looked away, some out of discomfort, others out of indifference. It was the kind of invisible rejection she was probably used to, the kind that hurts without making a sound. She scanned the room until her eyes landed on Daniel. Maybe it was because he was alone, maybe it was because he didn't look like he would turn her away. Or maybe deep down she sensed something broken in him that matched her own. Step by step she made her way across the cafe, her crutches echoing in the silence. Each movement seemed heavier than the last, as though she carried more than just her physical weight. When she reached his table, she paused, gripping the handles of her crutches tighter. Her voice came out small, almost fragile, as she asked if she could sit there. For a brief moment Daniel froze. Not because he didn't want her there, but because he wasn't prepared for what her presence meant. Letting her sit wasn't just about sharing a table, it was about letting someone into his quiet world, a world he had carefully kept closed off. But then he looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the rain dripping from her hair, he saw the exhaustion in her eyes, he saw the quiet desperation hidden beneath her polite question, and suddenly his own problems didn't feel so heavy anymore. He shifted slightly, careful not to wake his son, and gestured for her to sit. His voice was calm, gentle, and without hesitation. It wasn't just a yes, it was an invitation, a reassurance, a small act of kindness that carried more meaning than he could have known. The girl blinked, as if she hadn't expected the answer to come so easily. Slowly, she moved to the chair and lowered herself down, her movements careful and practiced. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, though. It was the kind of silence that feels like a pause between two strangers who are about to become something more. Her name was Amina. She had been traveling alone for most of the day, hopping between buses, trying to reach a place she wasn't even sure would accept her. After losing her parents in an accident, she had been passed between distant relatives, each one less willing than the last to take responsibility for a child with special needs. Eventually, she had decided to leave, not out of rebellion, but out of a quiet understanding that she wasn't truly wanted. Daniel listened, his heart tightening with every word she didn't say as much as the ones she did. He recognized that kind of silence. It was the same silence he carried after his wife died. The kind that hides pain because expressing it feels too heavy. As the minutes passed, something began to shift. What started as a simple act of kindness slowly turned into a shared moment of understanding. Daniel offered her some food. She hesitated at first, out of habit perhaps, but eventually accepted. The way she ate, carefully, gratefully, told a story of its own. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt something other than exhaustion. He felt needed. Not in the overwhelming, suffocating way he sometimes felt as a single father, but in a quiet, meaningful way. Like his presence mattered to someone outside his small world. And Amina, for the first time in what felt like forever, felt seen. Not as a burden, not as someone to be pitied, but as a person. Time seemed to slow down in that corner of the cafe. The storm outside continued, but inside, something warmer was taking shape, something fragile, yet powerful. Daniel's son stirred slightly, opening his eyes just enough to notice the girl sitting across from them. Children, unlike adults, don't see differences the same way. He smiled at her, a simple, innocent smile that carried no judgment. Amina hesitated, then smiled back. It was small at first, but it grew, as if she was remembering what it felt like to be a child again. That moment broke something open inside Daniel. He realized that life, no matter how broken it seemed, still had space for connection, still had room for kindness, still had the ability to surprise you in the most unexpected ways. But what he said next would change everything. He told her she didn't have to keep searching for a place that might not accept her. He told her that she could stay with them, at least for now. It wasn't a grand gesture, it wasn't a promise of forever, but it was something real, something immediate, something she needed more than anything. Amina's eyes filled with tears, not because she was sad, but because she wasn't used to being offered anything without conditions. Her entire journey had been filled with doors closing, and now, suddenly, one was opening. She tried to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, tears rolled down her cheeks, silent and steady. And in that moment, Daniel understood something important. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can give someone isn't money, or solutions, or even answers. Sometimes it's simply a place to sit, a place to belong, a place where they don't have to ask if they're welcome. If this story is touching your heart so far, don't forget to engage with the video, like, comment, and share it with someone who believes that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life. Days turned into weeks, and what began as a temporary arrangement slowly became something more permanent. It wasn't always easy. There were struggles, financial, emotional, and practical. Raising one child was already a challenge. Raising two, especially when one required extra care, felt overwhelming at times. But something had changed in Daniel. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was building something. And Amina, who once felt like she had nowhere to go, began to find her place. She started school again, she laughed more, she spoke more. The walls around her heart slowly came down, replaced by something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Of course, not everything was perfect. There were difficult days, moments of doubt, times when Daniel questioned whether he had made the right decision. But every time he saw Amina smile, every time he heard his son laugh with her, he was reminded of why he said yes that night. Because sometimes, life doesn't ask you to have all the answers. Sometimes it just asks you to be kind. Special request: before the story ends, comment below with one word that represents kindness to you. In the end, the question that started it all, "Can I sit here?" was never really about a chair at a cafe table. It was about belonging, about being seen, about finding a place in a world that often feels too big and too cold. And the answer she received didn't just give her a seat, it gave her a home. If this story moved you, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps keep stories like this alive, and reminds the world that kindness still exists, even in the smallest moments.